All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today for this, what we're calling a roundtable event. We're joined by three program directors. Dr. Galaska, he's an emergency medicine program director. Dr. Rosenblum, I think he's internal medicine program director. And then Dr. Rich, which is a family medicine program director. They're going to be joining us. We're going to talk about personal statements and how they've kind of shifted since over the years. Since there's more of a holistic review now, what does it mean? So before we get started with that, I think we have a word about what the CSGA has accomplished. We want to just put it out there, what we've accomplished and what we're moving for. Just a little recap. You know, we've started Connect events. We've been advertising those. We're having this program director event. We'll have more events that are similar to those. We just wrapped up our ERAS headshot event. That was professional headshots that we hosted at 11 spots across the country. We had match parties in March of this year that we did in 5 places across the country. Dr. G is leading us with Ross U Days, Ross Med Days. Those are about to start kicking off again in places that they did last year. We just finished one in University of Maryland Capital Region Hospital, I think last week. Well, a few more things from the CSGA. We've implemented the CSGA awards for students. Those were widely popular last term. We've been focused on creating the foundation for the CSGA. We've implemented an online workspace. We've given everyone a home so that the people who come behind us don't have to spin their wheels and get everything going again. So hopefully it will help implement change easier in the future. Javier can speak more about clinical science orientation.
Yeah, we just started those last week, and we're hopefully going to have those on a monthly basis for students that are just passing their step 1 and can join us for an orientation, an hour and a half of just getting just the basic information of what is offered and what resources are available to you during your clinical year. So you'll hear from clinical peer mentors, you'll hear a little bit from CSGA, and that is, we're moving now to a virtual live format, where before you had to read and watch videos through a Canvas course that I'm sure was a daunting task, but yeah, some hopefully good changes coming from there.
Last thing I want to mention is that we've been working with the Office of Career Attainment, the OCA, to make some changes to our MSPE template to just make it a little more structured like US schools and to give just a better flow to it. And hopefully those changes are going to be implemented this application cycle. And a lot of this couldn't have been done without the support from Student Affairs and Dr. G's team. And do we have another slide? Oh yeah. And I've already introduced our panel for today. Let me bring up, we'll start with, if you guys want to give a quick introduction to yourself while I bring up some questions, go ahead. We'll start with Dr. Rosenblum.
Yeah, hi everyone, welcome. My name is Mike Rosenblum. I'm a program director at Albany Medical Center, which is the home of Albany Medical College. I'm an internal medicine program director. I've been a graduate medical education now for over 20 years. I was previously the program director at a place called Bay State Medical Center in Springfield, Mass. for a number of years, and was actually a chair of medicine at Ross for a couple of years right in the heart of the pandemic. And so I'm here to help in any way that I can in terms of next steps for you guys. I'm happy to talk about my experiences around personal statements.
Dr. Rich.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, my name is Paul Rich, Dr. Rich. I am the Family Medicine Residency Program Director at Western Reserve Health Education's Family Medicine Program at Trumbull Regional Medical Center in Warren, Ohio. We're in the northeast corner of Ohio, and we are affiliated with the medical school in Rootstown, Northeast Ohio Medical University. I've been the program director here since 2011, so for about 13 years. And prior to that, family medicine private practice for about 15 to 20 years before that. So FM with OB. So I've been doing OB during the course of my career as well. So we have a large kind of women's health focus in our program as it pertains to kind of the residents working with me. So excited to be here, was very honored to be asked to be a part of this, and looking forward to your questions and any way that I could help you out.
I'm Michael Galishka. Uh-oh. I think my camera just froze there. Can everyone hear me okay?
Can
All
hear you.
right. Sorry about that. I'm Michael Galishka. I'm the program director at Conemaugh Memorial Medical Center's emergency medicine program in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and Western PA. I've been the program director since 2020 or 2021. It was kind of in and around the Christmas holiday. So I can't remember exactly what month I took over, but I've been program director for 4 or 5 years now. Before that, I was the APD of our program for roughly 7 years. And before that, I was in the Navy after getting out of residency. I do a good bit of student advising online for emergency medicine. I post a lot on social media forums under the semi-anonymous handle Gamer Yamduck, which has garnered me a good bit of opportunity to reach out and talk to students in a lot of different formats through EMRA and ACOEP's resident organization, and I've won several awards for the kind of online advising that I've been doing over the last decade or so. So I promise there's no question that's going to be asked tonight that I haven't already been asked, and probably at least 100 times. I've given multiple lectures over the years to national organizations on personal statement writing specifically, but as part of the application cycle for emergency medicine, obviously, that's kind of my side gig.
Thank you. We did have a form that went out to students, and we have some questions that were submitted. So we'll start with those, and then we'll turn the floor over to take questions from everyone in the audience in a little bit. So we'll start with this one that says, how has the focus of personal statements shifted over the last few years, given a more holistic review of the applicants?
I think holistic review isn't means different things to different people. There's always going to be depending on the individual program, things that they look at. I think the main kind of meaning of holistic review is you're not just relying on scores. You're not just filtering based on we take anyone above X board pass or board score and filter everyone out below that, and you're looking at the application more as a whole and totality to determine who to interview and how you rank people. And in that, different fields are going to weigh different pieces of the application differently. I'm pretty certain everyone's going to read the personal statement, but there's pretty good data if you look at program directors surveys through the NRMP. If you believe that data, it's a small subset of each field's program directors, but it's still probably the best national data that we have. And you can look at kind of where each individual field kind of puts an emphasis on personal statement and writing. And in some fields, it's a very important part of the application. I'd say even most fields, certain fields, it's really devalued in the application.
Yeah, I would just, echo that. Holistic means something very different to every program, depending on the number of applications they're getting, the number of signals that they're getting, depending on the specialty, which varies, greatly between programs. I've always historically, felt the personal statement, if it's good, it's really good. And that's as much as most people really need. It's when it's bad that it really becomes a problem. And that should be very rare. I think that's what everyone, here that we're talking with should try to avoid. And, what makes it good is you talk about yourself. It's personal, describes the things that are important to you, what you can bring to a residency program, what's unique about you. Highlight those things. I mean, that's really what helps you set yourself apart. As the entire program application has kind of grown with meaningful experiences. I mean, you can comment on a lot more, but you can go into much greater detail in the personal statement. I think that's something to really take advantage of. Show your passion for what you're doing. Talk about yourself a little bit, but also always consider that you're talking about yourself in the perspective of like, this is the residency that I want.
Yeah, so I would certainly say that I agree with the comments that Dr. Rosenblum and Dr. Goska made. I find this an interesting question. We're kind of posing the question as a more holistic approach just recently. I think that for me wouldn't be something that's recent. So, as I said, I've been a program director for 13 years. I came to graduate medical education from a pathway that was one in which I wasn't anticipating. I actually finished my residency in 1999 and had no aspirations for graduate medical education. I started a private family medicine practice with OB and fully intended for that to be my career. Unfortunately, about 10, 11 years into that career, the program that I graduated from was doing very poorly. I had maintained an affiliation with them and they were doing very poorly. They asked me to come on board to kind of take over and help turn the program around. The board passage rate at that time was like 58%. So as I kind of got on board within graduate medical education, my ideas about the kind of people that would make the best residents, best doctors, I think was maybe a little bit different from my experience in private practice. I've always somewhat had a more holistic approach to my review of these applications, especially within the personal statement. So I think there are some things that are in personal statements a lot of times that I don't feel I particularly want to see, and we can talk more about that. But there are a couple of things that I see a lot that I would prefer I not see and that I don't feel is necessary. But I think it's difficult when you're looking at an application from ARIS and then you're interviewing people for a short time to really get to know, I think, some of the important aspects of that individual that you would like to know that I think go a whole lot into them becoming a great physician, aside from just their academic, their medical knowledge and things of that nature, things like honor, character, integrity, things like that. And for me, the personal statement is about trying to glean things from the document that they write that might help me understand them a little bit better, understand what kind of work ethic they have, what kind of honor, character, and integrity they possess. Because I find as a program director, I don't typically have problems with my residents being unintelligent. Most people who graduate from medical school are not idiots, right? So, it's professionalism, it's character, it's integrity. And as you can try to relay things in your personal statement that might help someone understand what kind of person you are in that way, that's extremely helpful to me.
Right. Thank you for those answers. Well, another question is, should we address red flags in the personal statement?
I think first it's important probably to say that red flags are probably sometimes misinterpreted by students in terms of thinking like, what is a red flag that needs to be addressed? Failure of a board exam probably should be talked about somewhere in your application, whether it's the personal statement or if you had your medical school extended in the part of the application that it talks about medical school interruptions or extensions. But failing one biochem class as a first year medical student and then remediating it is hardly a red flag. And so I think sometimes people call attention to things that might not have ever gone noticed by programs when they're like too overly critical. I would, if you're going to make the decision to talk about a red flag in your personal statement, if you feel like you have something that is truly a red flag, let's talk like again, a board failure or having to repeat or remediate an entire year of medical school or some honors code violation in your school or something like that. If you're going to address it, you need to address it correctly. There is way too many times I've seen people, feeling like they're pressured to discuss a board failure and in doing so, they just make excuse after excuse about every life event that was going on with them and their family members at the time. And that's just not how you want to attack this, in my opinion. You really need to look at this from the program's point of view, right? If you're just trying to make an excuse over and over again, like multiple excuses of why you failed to try to explain it, the program director is going to look at that as this person is just somebody who's going to making excuse and not own up to their own mistake, right? What you need to do, in my opinion, is reframe the negative into a positive. Like, talk about what went wrong, how you recognize what went wrong, and how you had the perseverance, the grit, the resilience, however you want to define that, to push on and to kind of get past that red flag.
Again, I would agree wholeheartedly. I think it's important to address, the significant red flags, because if not, you're going to use, a big chunk of your 15 to 20-minute interview for that. And that's not really what you want to be focusing on during your interview. But I think this idea of taking ownership, we all have challenges in our lives, and how we overcome them is really the most important thing. We want to see growth in our residents. We want to see people who really own up to, the issues maybe that they faced, how they learned from it, how they, again, I think as Dr. Galushka put really well, how they made it into a positive. What did you learn? How did you take that? And how can you help other people with that? Because oftentimes that's a really important thing, right? You're going to be mentoring and teaching other residents and other people, across your career. And so, I think those are some of the ways to really take something that was truly a challenge and make it into more of a positive spin. Critical to have someone else read it a few times, go over it and make sure it's really meeting the mark in terms of what you're doing. But I think it's a great opportunity to talk about those things. The other place, as I mentioned earlier, is meaningful experiences. Again, you don't usually have enough character count, typically to put something that may meet, your expectations in terms of how you want to describe something. But don't put stuff from like high school or college in there. I mean, that's not meaningful at this point. In the same way that, maybe you go through residency and you're applying for fellowship, you don't need to talk about medical school.
So, yeah, what I would say is, I think Dr. Galushka made a very good point, and that is that a lot of students, I agree, misunderstand what red flags are. I think one of the difficult aspects of having a forum and a question and answer session like this is that you're getting the opinions of here 3 different program directors. And I always tell students and residents that I work with, the one thing I can tell you for sure is that I'm an expert on one thing. I'm an expert on Paul Rich. And so, I truly understand what I'm looking for in a student and a resident. I think that a lot of what I'm looking for mirrors a lot of my faculty. We share a lot of similar beliefs in the type of students and residents that we'd like to have, but we can really only speak for us. And so I assume if someone is asking this question, should I address red flags in a personal statement, you're asking it because your sense or your concern is that if I don't address it, does somebody see this, what I consider a red flag, and as Dr. Galushka pointed out, potentially a failure on one of your steps, potentially a leave of absence, potentially a failure of one of your courses during medical school. If I don't address it, but it's seen in the application, will somebody totally discount my application completely, and I won't even get the opportunity for an interview? What I would probably tell you is, again, at least in my opinion, is that if those are the type of faculty and program directors that encounter you and discount you completely for that reason, it might not be the best program for you to go to in the first place. Because again, as I get back to honor, character, and integrity, I've had students come to my program that never failed a class, never failed any of their steps, never had any leaves of absence, and they were terribly unprofessional residents. They caused me lots of problems, and I wish I had never taken them. And I had other residents who've had a failure or had something that they probably considered a red flag. And there are some of the residents that today are attendings that I have the most respect for because of a lot of the other aspects of the type of person and physician that they are. And maybe that might be the kind of program that might be better for you. I would probably say, if you were really pushing me to say, should I address it in there? I don't think it's a bad idea, but I wouldn't belabor it. And I wouldn't, as Dr. Gluska pointed out, don't try to make over extenuating excuses for it. Own up to it, take responsibility. Again, those are things that show character, taking responsibility for mistakes and realizing that, you know, you've learned from them and you're going to move on and make sure you don't make them again.
Everybody's muted.
Helps if I unmute myself. One of the other questions here is what prompts can help us write a well-rounded personal statement? I guess this is going for, you know, students who sit down to write their personal statement and then they just draw a blank and they're not sure where to start, right? Is there anywhere they can find a prompt or something to help them start?
Yeah, AI will write the entire thing for you.
It's true.
I mean, let's be honest. I almost guarantee you a large portion of medical students are going to use AI to at least jog their mind of like the bare bones skeleton of a personal statement. That doesn't mean you should necessarily do that if you have a good original personal statement. But if you are somebody who you're sitting down with like terrible writer's block and you don't even know where to start, I think it's a tool that you could utilize to at least give you an idea of what, you know, a starting point for to outline it. Again, you don't want everyone's personal statement all to sound the same, so I probably wouldn't rely on just AI writing the entire thing for you, but it's certainly a tool. I mean, I think reading your friends' personal statements, especially if they're going into another field, that way, again, you're not copying their personal statement because different fields' personal statements are going to sound a little bit differently. But that can help you. Just again, getting an idea, little ideas. The more you see of them, the more you read.
You know, it's interesting bringing up AI because we had a similar discussion with our medical students here in Albany. And, you know, we really encourage them to write their personal statement, but if they want to check it grammatically and, you know, for any kind of spelling errors, like, you know, feel free. I mean, I think that it's not in the future, it's now. So, you know, this should be an expectation. You know, coming up with ideas, I think some of the most interesting, you know, ideas are when you come up with a theme. Maybe there's something in your life, some hobby or something else that you can tie through your personal statement. That can be really interesting. I think, you know, one of the most entertaining ones that I ever read that was really well written was about rock climbing and how rock climbing, he's a guy who went into internal medicine, but he's going to go into critical care ultimately, at least he hopes so, is, you know, it's about taking a little bit of calculated risk. It's about learning to fall and get back up. It's about learning to, you know, trust and depend on other people to support you. So, I mean, if you have an interesting hobby like that, that can be good. You know, the other advice I usually give is just start jotting things down. You know, give it a bit of time, write things down whenever you have a chance, and, you know, use that, you know, as a starting point. It's hard to write a personal statement. That's why, you know, I mentioned earlier, like a good personal statement is all you need. If we were going to all be able to write great personal statements, we probably wouldn't have gotten into medicine to begin with.
Yeah, that's certainly true. Most of us in medicine are not necessarily great creative writers. You know, I would probably say, you know, I came up in a time when certainly I was in medical school in the late 90s. So at a time when the mid 90s, or when we certainly didn't have AI to write personal statements for us. And I even find it crazy today that I guess now you can pay people to write your personal statement. So I actually wrote my own personal statement back in the day. So, you know, for me, I wouldn't say that I'm somebody who enjoys writing, but I didn't find it terribly difficult because, you know, I guess I looked at it like a speech or something. You know, I've been told by many of my friends I never met a podium I didn't like. So, and I also kind of like talking about myself and talking about how I grew up, what kind of upbringing I had, and how I think that upbringing molded me and shaped me. Not only those people I encountered during my education, but also family, friends, and things of that nature. So when I interview people, I think a lot of times medical students leave my interview I think thinking that they were not expecting the kind of questions that they got. And I asked a lot of questions about upbringing, what your parents did for a living, and what kind of, where you fell in within your siblings, and when you started working for the first time, trying to glean kind of what kind of person you've kind of grown up to be, and why you kind of became that kind of person. And if you're somebody who doesn't mind, I guess I have a son who's very shy, so he doesn't so much like talking about himself. And I have another son who's just like me, you can't shut him up. But at the end of the day, if you're somebody who can tell a little story about yourself, so to speak, and within that story, describe what type of, not necessarily just student. I mean, again, at the end of the day, with all due respect, we're going to look at transcripts. We're going to look at step scores and things of that nature. If you're just trying to tell me what kind of academic student you are, I can see that on paper. And at the end of the day, there are people who are at the upper echelon of that who don't make. I ask this question when I do my interviews. Why do you think people sometimes who get the highest scores and the highest percentiles don't turn out to be all that great of physicians? Why do you think that is? It's because they lack a lot of these other intangible characteristics. So if you can tell a good story about how you possess a lot of these intangible characteristics to go beyond just the academics, those are the things I think that make people go from being an average or a good doctor to a great or an outstanding doctor. And those are the kind of people I'm looking for.
I muted myself again. Let's see. Some questions from the audience here. How important are extracurricular activities and personal statements in residency application?
I don't know. I mean, unless you're going to put your extracurricular like hobbies, you're gonna like pick a hobby like Dr. Risenbloom had mentioned before to is your kind of theme of your personal statement, which that's a good chunk of personal statement strategy writing. Some people take that approach. Yeah, otherwise I wouldn't mention my hobbies in my personal statement unless it's like the theme of the personal statement. There's a hobby section in the application. That's where there wasn't last year. They took it out. They put it back in this year. Prior to last year, there was always a hobby section, so it's back. I would put your hobbies in the hobbies section. In terms of how important it is, I think at least in my field in emergency medicine, where many of the attending physicians all have a ton of different hobbies and lives outside of the hospital. It's a huge part of the application and interviews. I always tell most EM people that if you have a hobby section, that's probably going to be 90% of your interview for many of your EM interviews, because a lot of faculty just like to talk about you as a person and what you like to do in your off time to try to get to know you. And so it's very important as for talking points during your interview, but I wouldn't waste space in your personal statement just listing out your hobbies.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. I mean, it's not really the place to talk about the hobby itself, but using it as a theme to run through can make it a little bit more readable and interesting. When they took out the hobby section, I was one of the more program directors got upset over that than I think anything else in the last 20 years. Because the hobbies can really be used to establish rapport and ask questions that are pretty easy for you guys to feel, which is good because, we want you to be relaxed, in the interview process itself. And so, it's good to have hobbies. It's good to develop hobbies. And we want to see that you're well-rounded. I think that's important. We don't want someone who, they got unbelievable scores on their USMLEs, but they can't interact because they've never done anything outside of medicine. So I love what Dr. Rich mentioned earlier about, work, life experience, those things, should be in your personal statement that, again, can set you apart from other people.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think I always find some of the hobbies interesting and even sometimes comical. So, when somebody has an interesting hobby, I bring it up during the interview too, as just the kind of I guess, icebreaker or talking point. But I mean, I certainly wouldn't put them in the personal statement. And I can't really say that there are too many times I can recall where I chose a resident over another resident or what have you as a result of hobbies. I mean, people like to read, cook, travel, spend time with their family, play basketball, go rock climbing. I mean, I don't think it's nice to have them, and I think they belong, as Dr. Gluska said, in the hobby section of the application, but don't necessarily need to be a big part of your personal statement.
Just to follow up on this, I know we talked a lot about hobbies, but some extracurricular activities could include like leadership in like clubs and organizations as well. And so just in case this person was referring to that, just real quick, would you consider putting leadership position, clubs, organization, stuff like that in a personal statement? Again, just real quick, and we'll move on to the next one.
I would be careful to rehash your CV in the personal statement. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't make my entire personal statement, each paragraph, just another one of my CV bullet points that are already in my experience sections. But that being said, if one of your experiences is extremely impactful, let's say you're president or you're, I don't know, vice president of your school's interest group for that field, or you hold a national position in an organization in a field that you're going into, probably something, a big piece like that, that's a big feather in your cap. I mean, that certainly impacted your application to that field is certainly, something that you can bring into the personal statement. But you don't want to just like essentially have 5 paragraphs, and each paragraph just be another bullet point that you've already said in your experience section.
Yeah, I agree 100%. The information that's already there in your CV, usually meets the mark, unless it's something that's really special and meaningful. It's one of your impactful experiences, and there's just not enough room to write about it, in the impactful experience section. And so you want to, add a little bit more detail to it and make it more robust. But don't be so repetitive. I mean, it's hard. We get thousands of applications. We don't read all that. I got 6,500 last year. I certainly don't read 6,500 applications, but I'd still be reading them now from last year. And so try to keep things as succinct as possible. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I concur again. I think that, I mentioned some characteristics of individuals earlier that are important to me, and leadership qualities is certainly one of those. I tell students and residents all the time that I think, each physician needs to aspire to be a leader. You ultimately will be the leader of your practice, or you'll lead your patients, or attempt to better health, both mentally and physically, and they need to feel confident that you are able to do that. So I'm always hesitant when I interact with students and residents that seem not to have leadership potential. But again, I can see those leadership positions in your application elsewhere. And occasionally, as I see them, I'll ask questions about them. And I don't necessarily, as Dr. Gluska pointed out, need them rehashed again and relisted in the personal statement. If I want to ask about them and want to discuss them with you more, I do so during the interview.
Perfect. Thank you for that. This one, I'm going to try to combine 2 of the questions that were submitted together because they're kind of the same topic. It's like, what are things you do not want to see on a personal statement? And what are themes of a personal statement that you're just tired of seeing, or you don't want to see?
So I responded to that, that, there's a lot of redundancy and there's a lot of similarity between them, but there's a lot of discussion around a family illness that maybe motivated someone to go into medicine or personal illness. So we see that quite often. I don't think that carries as much weight as really talking about why you're interested in this specialty. You can put a sentence, but don't write a whole paragraph, about, that type of experience. The other thing that I often see really has to do with your experiences maybe as a child or, as a teenager. Again, that was an important part of your life that got you to this point. But not a lot of emphasis on that in the personal statement, please. You don't have a lot of space. Ideally, your personal statement is 1 page and not more than that.
Yeah, I think probably one of my, well, I have a lot of pet peeves about the personal statement, but one of my biggest ones is length. If you can't get your personal statement down to one page, it's a problem. Now, I don't mean like, look, if it's one page and one extra sentence, fine, but like your personal statement should not be 2 pages long. You're 99% of applicants can get their personal statement down to a page. You're not any more important than them. You don't need 3 pages to tell your story. You need to be able to get it succinct. Program directors are reading hundreds, if not 1,000 or more applications. It needs to be succinct enough that they can read it and get an idea of who you are without it being so long that they just put it down. So that's one. Spelling, grammar mistakes. I mean, we mentioned AI for a grammar checker. Grammarly is excellent. Obviously, I would always run it through an AI grammar checker and also have multiple people reading it specifically for grammar and spelling errors. I think personal statements that don't really address why you're going into a specialty kind of annoy me. Like it's clearly just a rehash of your medical school personal statement, like Dr. Rosenblum talked about. Like, you know, whenever I was 8 years old, my mother got diagnosed with X, Y, or Z, and that's why I went to medical school. And like 9/10 of the personal statement is about all these life experience that led you to medical school. I mean, it's just your medical school personal statement. You have to address, you know, the field you're going into at some point, and that should really be the focus of your personal statement. Humor can be hard to pull off. Sometimes it's done well. Many times it is not done well. Unless you are really confident in your ability to write with a humorous tone, I would not do that, because more than often it just doesn't come across well. Yeah, those are most of them.
So I'll say, first of all, I was thinking we were going to stick with that order of Galuska, Rosenblum, and Rich, but
Shut
Rosenblum,
up.
he deviated. Yeah, he deviated from the order. So now it's anybody's game, I guess. I'll stick with going third. I'm fine there. But in all seriousness, I would say I agree with Dr. Rosenblum's first one. I've certainly seen enough personal statements that discuss an illness from a family member, and this is your motivation, or your own personal illness at some point. And then I think the other ones that I see very often that I don't think anybody mentioned was mentioning experiences with patients along the way. Patients that you've seen when you were working on your rotations and things of that nature often get described, sometimes in great detail in personal statements, oftentimes being relayed to me that, this interaction went very well. The patient was extremely happy. Typically, they're very happy because you're a medical student and you're able to spend a heck of a lot more time with them than almost anybody else. So they're very, very pleased with that. But I think at the end of the day, I don't really think you need to write things about illnesses of family members all that as much as I see them, and then kind of experiences with patients. I think, I agree with Dr. Galuska that, if you're going into emergency medicine or internal medicine or family medicine, those of us that have dedicated our lives to those fields would really like to know what your reasons are for that. We want to know why you're also choosing the field that is something that we've maybe done now for 15 or 20, or for me now 25 years. So, that to me is something that I would want to hear about. And so, but I think those other things you can leave out.
I like change, so that's why I went first. The other thing that I would just add is, please don't ever write anything negative in your personal statement about anyone else. To me, that's kind of like the kiss of death. Like, I don't like internal medicine doctors, or, I did this and because other people got it wrong. In the same, vein as Dr. Rich mentioned earlier, I mean, be professional, be modest, show a lot of integrity, don't disparage anyone.
Yeah, especially patients, which invariably I read a handful of personal statements every year that talk about like patients, you know, the waiting room was filling up with drug seekers or something. Like that. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, don't punch down. This is not the time. It's not good humor. That just comes across terribly.
Let me look in the chat here. We've got some other questions. Some of them have been answered in the chat by Dr. Rosenblum, so I'm trying to. I think in general, we addressed a lot of them. Some of them are talking about work experience and other things that I feel like you've talked about already, because you don't want to just restate your whole CV in your personal statement. So unless you have a particular experience that you're going to pull out from your work experience or research that's meaningful to talk about, then you probably shouldn't put it in your personal statement. It's already on your CV. Is that the general consensus of what's been said?
I think so. I think Dr. Rosenblum made a good point earlier where he said, you know, if you're belaboring and being consumed with your personal statement to the point where, you know, you just have a great fear, if your personal statement is going to make or break you getting an interview, I mean, that to me is just kind of not right. So I agree with what he said. You need to write a good personal statement. We're reading hundreds, or as these gentlemen explained, sometimes thousands of personal statements. Very few of them, if any. In fact, actually, I can think of in 13 years, maybe only 2 that really, really wowed me. And that I thought, holy cow, this person was just one heck of a writer. But overall, you know, they're most of the time just good. And the next step is to get you that interview. And to me, you know, that's kind of where it's time for you to sell yourself, so to speak, in some ways. But at the end of the day, the personal statement, unless it's bad, shouldn't be the thing that's keeping you from getting to that next step. And some of the things that are bad, I think Dr. Gluska and Dr. Rosenblum said, you don't want to do things that don't display character or professionalism. You don't want to disparage people. You don't want to display a lack of humility. I mean, these are characteristics that program directors don't want to see.
We had some other questions that were submitted before, but we've answered them as we've gone through. One was, how long should a personal statement be? We've got the 1-page answer. Try to condense it because everyone's reading so much in their applications from the program side. Another question would be, it's talking about, I think, applying to different specialties and personal statements. Like, would you prefer to see like a personal statement for that one specialty, or can you write one that could be, you know, used in 2 different ones if you're double applying?
No, if you're dual applying, you should write 2 separate personal statements. I mean, obviously there might be some overlap in those, but you should tweak it to the field you're applying to, and just have 2, and then make sure you submit the correct personal statement to the programs that you're applying in that field. Don't accidentally submit your family medicine personal statement to internal medicine and vice versa.
Yeah, I think it's a really important question, because I know for internal medicine, at least last year, about 20% of the applicants across the country dual applied. You know, you need to have separate personal statements, and there's definitely shared experiences that, you know, go across the vast majority of specialties. But, you know, please take the time to make it specific to the residency, you know, program type that you're applying to. You know, if you show a lack of effort, that's always a bad thing. You know, we talked about personal statement being a page long. Well, if you can't write more than a half a page, to me, that's a real red flag also.
Yeah, I don't think there's much more to add to that. I mean, you definitely should be writing a personal statement specific for that specialty.
Question that was in the chat here speaks about NRMP program director survey data is out there regarding what holds the greatest importance. They're asking for your input. What are the 3 most important factors of an application to you? Some examples were like step 2 score, letters of recommendation, personal statement, and the list goes on and on. But I think they're just wanting your top 3 most important factors of an application.
I mean, mine definitely kind of, if you look at emergency medicine, and where program directors decide to rank candidates, it largely the two pieces of the application that dwarf pretty much all other pieces of the application. One is the standard letters of evaluation, the SLOs, which EM is one of the fields. There's now a few other fields that I think are using a standard letter of evaluation, but we've been doing that for 20 plus years. And program directors put a huge amount of importance on other programs' evaluations of medical students and how they anticipate they are going to rank that candidate, because we all kind of look for similar things in candidates. So the slow letters, the interview itself is extremely important in terms of decision to rank. Obviously, the decision to interview, the interview hasn't happened yet, but and other things in terms of decision to interview for program directors, at least from my end, I look at hobbies and past jobs a lot. For a variety of reasons. Past jobs definitely help, people who've had jobs in the service industry before. I mean, emergency medicine is a very customer service driven field. It's a very multitasking driven field. And people with past service industry jobs tend to do the multitasking aspect of that job very well, and it's not really something that you can find on the interview on the application otherwise. I think people I think board scores obviously predict who's going to pass their tests, their ultimate board, but really, as Dr. Rich mentioned, don't really predict who's going to be the best residents. And so we don't put a ton of importance on that in terms of screening who to interview. Coming from a rural program in rural Pennsylvania, we use geography quite a bit in terms of gettability. We can't, especially in an era where emergency medicine, a lot of programs are going unfilled, or have the last 2 years when unfilled. You can't interview, if you're going to interview 100 people, you can't interview 100 people that are going to rank you 30th on their list. Like, you have to be interviewing the correct people that you think are gettable. And part of that is looking at geography, people from in and around your area. Is a rural place looking for people with hobbies, interests, upbringings that were in more rural areas, as opposed to people who lived all their life in Philadelphia or something. And part of that is obviously very subjective, but I think a lot of program directors, to at least to some extent, use some geographic screening to try to find people that are most likely to have the interest in their area.
Yeah, I think that, a lot of really important points were made there. The other thing, that's been a huge game changer in medicine, in the world of application inflation, is signaling. I feel like if I don't mention that,
Oh yeah.
for the last, 2 years, we went from 5 signals 2 years ago to 7 last year. We basically put on our website that if you don't signal off, the likelihood of you getting off an interview is really small. We're going to be saying the same thing this year. In medicine this year, for those who may know, is 3 gold signals and is 12 silver signals. I'm hopeful that we only have to look at gold signals, because in many ways, I think that is indicative, it's highly indicative of someone's interest in your program. And those people are much more likely to be people who are, enjoy the geography. They maybe live there, maybe they've got to college in the area, they have a pull that's bringing them back. If we don't have enough gold signals, we'll go to the silver ones. I'm hoping we don't have to, but if we do, we do. Because we have so many applications, we built filters into the ERAP system the way everyone else does. We will have a step 2 filter. We will use the signaling as the first step, though. And that will allow me to have a smaller number that our group has to look through in order to make decisions. Once you're off an interview, I think it's really important to keep in mind, people are offering you an interview because they want you to come to their program. And so you have gotten past the first line of filters. You have the academic ability, you have the know-how. Now they want to know you as a person. And they really want to get to explore who you are. And it's your chance really to talk about yourself and sell yourself a little bit, which is, something that not everyone feels very comfortable with. So I think it's important that you practice that going forward. But for us, it's going to be signaling. If you don't give us any signal, unless the dean of our med school calls me up, I probably won't ever look at the application. And because I want to be honest, I don't want people to waste their time. There's a lot of cost that goes into this for you guys. And so if you're going to medicine, use your signals judiciously.
Yeah, I think this is probably a lot more complex question than it would just appear. I think Dr. Galuska pointed out a number of things. One of the things he mentioned that resonates with me is also gettability. I sit in the northeast corner of Ohio, halfway between Cleveland and Pittsburgh. So I'm halfway between UPMC and the Cleveland Clinic, and University Hospital in Cleveland, and not far from Ohio State. And so, I recognize wholeheartedly that, the number of people that want to do family medicine, unfortunately, isn't what I would like it to be today. And certainly the number of people that want to do family medicine in Northeast Ohio and Youngstown, Ohio, is not where everybody's dream to go is. But at the end of the day, there are a number of different factors I'm looking for. And so I wouldn't say that I put 100% of emphasis on any of them. As they mentioned, board scores, some people will put kind of a criteria. Sometimes I do that when we have so many applications, but every time I do it, I feel uneasy about it, because I feel like, are there people I'm overlooking that would be tremendous candidates for my program, and I'm overlooking it if they had a score under this, or a score here. So then I'm really, those people that might have board scores that aren't where I want them to be, I'm really focusing then maybe more attention on what does their personal statement look like, and then I might put more importance on it, because am I finding something in there that really makes me want to interview this person? And so, the other thing I really like to do is I as Dr. Gluska mentioned, I recruit a lot of the people that are in the Midwest. So because I think I have a better chance of getting those. And I also really take a strong look at the students that rotated with us, so because I got a firsthand look at them when they were students with me. And I often try to tell students, if there's someplace you really think you really liked, and you want to do that specialty, and you really liked that program when you rotated there, make sure they know it, because the students that I work with, if I talk to them and they're interested in family medicine, I really try to spend more time with them and get to know them, and really kind of get an idea of whether or not, because as I said, I'm really trying to get to know the person. And it's hard to do that from reading an ARIS application. It's hard to do that from a 20 or 30-minute interview. I can't tell you how difficult it is, no matter how many of these criteria we talk about. And I think I've perfected it one year, and then I get somebody that I totally misread. Somebody that I thought, boy, this was somebody that was actually down the list on my rank list. I thought, well, we'll take him, but I moved him down. And then he turned out to be somebody that if I knew what I know now, I would have put him first. And
Or vice versa. Or vice versa. People you rank
So,
highly that just don't.
I'm just constantly, even after 13 years, mystified by, I can't figure out the perfect way to choose the right student to become the best resident for me. It's just as stressful and difficult for us as it is for you. And so there's no perfect answer to any of these questions, unfortunately. I wish there was. And I don't mean to give a politician's answer in some ways, but that's really the way it is, in a lot of circumstances.
We've had some other questions that we've kind of answered in the chat. One of them that didn't get answered was, how much time do you spend reading an individual personal statement? I would assume that everyone gets, like, if you decide to review an applicant, then you spend the time reviewing it and reading it. But I would say that it's probably as fast as you can read, because you're reviewing 1,000 of them. But you feel free to answer if you want to chime in on that.
Yeah, I spend a decent amount of time reading them, but I don't read them at the time that I'm selecting the interviews. I look at the experience section, I look at geography, I look at the letters and the CV of the person, and sometimes I'll go into the personal statement when I'm reviewing the applicant if there's like something I need an explanation on. But I feel like I can usually get a pretty good quick idea on somebody without looking at it, and I really don't want to read it twice. because that's just creating more work for myself. I spend a good bit of time reading the personal statement the week I'm going to interview somebody. I take notes on it. I form questions around the personal like that I'm going to ask the applicant based on things they may have said in their personal statement. And if I did that a month beforehand on 1,000 people, there's just no way I'm going to remember. So yeah.
Yeah, I mostly enjoy reading the personal statements, even though I did bring up some issues that are kind of recurrent themes that aren't quite as enjoyable. But I do think it's important that you guys as applicants realize, that a lot of this is just getting ready the day before the interview, where you look more in depth. Like, okay, this person seems like they would do well in our program. They have some connection potentially to the area. It's great if they've rotated with us and we already know them. Or if you're fortunate enough, you have a medical school that's there and you can get introduced to people pretty regularly. But again, there's no real definition of holistic, review. I've always asked, how long would it take to read the entire application, every single word? You're probably talking a half hour. And so if you multiply that by a few thousand, it takes up a lot of time. And so I think that there are many program directors that, they see it as a personal statement there. Maybe they read a few words, maybe they read the last paragraph, but we also know from some of the research over the last 20 years that a lot of program directors don't like to read them. We may be a little bit different, and that's part of the reason that we're here, speaking with you and trying to give you some advice.
Yeah, I think there's always, I think students are oftentimes shocked at how many times they go on interviews and they're in the interview and it is very obvious that the person that's interviewing them has not even ever read their personal statement, because the questions they're asking are like clearly in there. I don't know the exact percentages, but it's a lot of people don't read them.
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting question. In fact, I find it humorous, Ryan, that you mentioned maybe just as fast as you could read it. Because everybody's reading is different. My wife, who happens to be one of our faculty as well, I think she's a speed reader. She looks at them and she knows everything that's in there, I think in 10 seconds. And I was a remedial reader in grade school, I tell her, so I wasn't nearly as bright. So I take my time and I kind of spend as much time as I feel like I need to get what I'm looking for. And that's different on different personal statements. And obviously it's more frustrating when the personal statements are, as I think Dr. Gluska mentioned earlier, 2 and 3 pages, which they definitely do not need to be. And I do also the exact same thing that Dr. Gluska mentioned. I read them or peruse them right before the interview to reacclimate myself with it and to jot down some questions that I want to ask from them. So for those people that I'm going to interview, I end up looking them over twice. But I can't say that I spend the same amount of time on every single one.
All right, that brings us to 8:59, which is right at the 1 hour mark. So I want to thank our panel for coming and joining us today. Thanks for everyone who's come out to ask the questions, and I hope that the session was beneficial for everyone. We're going to try to have more sessions like this moving forward, and maybe some of our panel can return.
Yeah, I would say for me, I very much enjoyed being involved. And again, I thank you for asking me. If there's any of the students that are on that have other questions or want to reach out to me at any time, I can make sure that somebody can get some contact information for me. But I'm always welcome, as I'm sure not kind of indicating the other gentlemen aren't, but always willing to have somebody reach out and ask questions. We're always willing to be helpful. We certainly wouldn't get on at this time of the day to try to help if we weren't fully interested in helping people like yourselves.
I'm gonna drop my email in the chat real quick. If anyone has any, we didn't really get, and that wasn't the purpose of this, but specialty specific questions. If anyone has any specific questions about applying to emergency medicine or your personal statement for that, I'll drop my email in the chat real quick.
I'll throw mine in as well. There are a few people at Ross know how to get in touch with you. I'm happy to help out. I want to see everyone be successful.
I threw mine in there as well.
Really appreciate the invite, by the way.
Yeah, happy to have you. Appreciate you coming, and we'll talk to see if we can put another one together on maybe a different topic moving forward.
Good luck, everyone.
Good luck.
Yes, always nice to hang out with the Rossies a little bit. Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.